Well, I finally did it. I finally brought back my old iTunes library, which had been lying dormant on an old computer at my parents' house since I think about 2015. And I'd had the idea about a full year ago to resurrect the iTunes library, but it took me a full year, a full year to take the plunge because I think I was just so entrenched in Spotify, in algorithmic music. But I realized about a year ago that the algorithmic music listening experience was not hitting the way it used to. And then I thought, you know what? I have all this music already that I own. All it takes is to take it from one computer to another. And so, without giving too much away, because I'm going to talk about it a bit more, but it has been great. But it also got me thinking, why did we so easily hand over control of our media experience to these giant platforms that feed us content through algorithms? And why has the algorithmic media experience started to feel so disappointing lately? Or is it just me? Anyway, and if you're seeing me here for the first time, hi. I make videos usually about creativity, culture, media, stuff like that. Sometimes it is in a more researched format, as you are about to see, sometimes in more of an informal chat vlog format. So lots of exciting variation happening there. And of course, I do encourage people to follow along because I'm trying to really make a go of it lately after kind of having a bit of a rocky year last year where I really questioned everything and was like, do I even want to do this anymore? Do I even want to talk to a camera anymore? But then I decided, you know what? One more go, maybe, or I don't know what the future holds. But yeah, we're in my one more go era, and so I'm feeling quite optimistic occasionally, also sometimes very despondent. That was the story earlier today, but I'm over the despondency, and it would be great if stuff started to work out here. So anyway. That's my introduction. I'm sorry. I'm terrible at marketing myself, but I feel like I have to. How else do you make your way in this algorithmic world? Of course, this whole experience of trying to, let's say, resurrect my iTunes library is part of this discussion about analog, physical media, digital minimalism, anti-tech that's really been coming up a lot in internet conversations over the past year or so. And I was early into this conversation, I think, for the first time in my life, I think I was one of the first people talking about something, which is wow, that was a big part of my reason for coming back to the topic, actually, was because I was like, wow, was I actually ahead of the curve in talking about my desire to detach a bit from algorithmic media and move towards not so much physical media per se, but offline media. When I'm listening to music through an MP3 player, through my iTunes library, I understand that is not analog. It's not physical media, but it's in the same family. It's media where I'm not having what I listen to next dictated to me by an algorithm. I am choosing it myself. I have curated it myself. That's what I'm talking about here. Also, I'm not really talking about analog devices in this conversation. I'm really sticking to the media consumption conversation. I think the reason people are talking about analog, physical media, whatever we want to call it, is that it's speaking to very real concerns about attention span in the age of short form video, about memory issues stemming from social media, about potential loss of intelligence, potentially, about the emotional impacts of social media platforms, of comparison constantly to other people, of performing your identity constantly for a camera. of surveillance through platforms without our consent. Within this, there's this desire to remove yourself from the constant bombardment with information where everything is always explicitly vying for your attention. And to switch to physical media can feel like a way to claw back some of the control over your attention span from these online platforms, to take control of your brain in this media landscape of everything, constant bombardment with information, but it's sort of everything that simultaneously feels like nothing. It's all consuming, but at the same time, it's kind of so shallow. And there was a time, though, when the internet was seen more as a place of infinite possibilities and infinite connectivity and optimistic connection with the world. It represented a new horizon of communication, moving beyond verbal communication, written communication, the typical forms of communication people were used to, and moved towards a more collective consciousness. Perhaps, or it seemed to be heading in that direction. It was moving towards the creation of a shared human mythology through this open sharing of all of the information humans had ever compiled. Now, I was not there really at the time. I've never experienced this form of online communication, but I did recently read a repost of a 1997 essay by Mark Pesce on Default Blog. And this essay is called "On the Internet, You Don't Discover Reality, You Create It," which explains the deterritorialization of the self is the essential feature that marks human entry into cyberspace. In the universe of infinite connection and possibility, the only possible ontology is magical. Reality as that which is invoked, the world conformant to will. So then, what's the internet today? I would say, from my personal experience of the internet, is that increasingly over, let's say, the past decade or so, it's felt anything but conformant to will. It feels like it operates not according so much to a shared consciousness, but rather a sort of consciousness controlled by corporation. The internet has moved from accessibility of inconceivable amounts of human information to filtering and packaging of that information to serve certain interests. These forces are out there not to make us smarter, not to facilitate our connectivity, but in fact to make us a bit less thoughtful, let's say, to boil our insights down to the most black and white terms, to keep us all separated and fighting, to keep us from thinking because we're too bombarded with everything. And I mean, I would say to that, maybe, but I mean, ultimately the neuroscience is not so clear. Quoted in Time magazine, Barbara Shin Cunningham, director of the Neuroscience Institute at Carnegie Mellon University, says, "I'm not sure it's changing how our brains operate, but rather leveraging how our brains operate to keep us engaged with our electronics." So in this sense, it's not so much that we're losing our ability to focus. It's not that our attention spans necessarily are getting worse. It's more that we're responding to the behavioral engineering built into the devices and platforms that have become so ubiquitous as to feel inescapable. Maybe even then some would say that this isn't cause for too much concern, that humans have always responded to new technologies. You know, you have those who take up the technologies, and then you have those who respond to others' uptake of the technologies. There was a time, for example, when the novel was considered a new technology, and people panicked about that, thinking that it would lead people into a fantasy world, that it would disengage them too much from reality. In fact, that kind of does seem like exactly what we're talking about with the internet being a place of magic that is kind of a way of disengaging from reality, or potentially encountering all possible realities. I don't know. Whatever it is. Emma Smith, professor of Shakespeare Studies at Hartford College, Oxford, wrote in The Guardian, "Concentration is a social learned behavior that is more necessary in certain contexts than in others. The modern appetite for binging on box sets and multi-episode podcasts makes it clear that we're not losing the ability to concentrate, merely directing it towards different media." And in some ways, this rings absolutely true to me. I mean, looking at my screen time some weeks, I'm like, well, I spent 6-7 hours looking at my phone. And I can guarantee a lot of that was not, doing work or whatever. That was probably scrolling on some app. And in that, though, yes, I know I'm always searching for the dopamine hit of the next good video, but I have applied a level of sustained attention to the search for that next dopamine hit. And it does seem true that in essence, what we're experiencing is a redirection of our attention. And it seems that what's actually happening isn't that we can't pay attention. It seems more that a lot of people are finding that quite simply, the redirection of our attention in this way doesn't always feel that good. Because also the trend towards physical media or analog or anti-tech speaks to subscription fatigue, paying monthly for access to media that we were once able to own, to pick up and hold in our hands, to have forever unless we got rid of it. It speaks to the frustrations of handing over control of what we once had easier access to these huge evil corporations. It speaks to the fact that algorithms often do tend to dredge up the same tired suggestions over and over again, leaving us wishing for some of that novelty of going into a store of some sort of physical media form. Let's say, I don't know, a record store, and finding something entirely new, something entirely unexpected, getting a recommendation from a member of staff who makes it their whole job to know about these things. Why did we give that world up just for the ease of this corporate control? So if we really want to get down to the question of why is physical media back, maybe it's back because it's just fun and nice to have something to hold, to have something to own. In a YouTube video, Jacob Burrows breaks down the experiential quality of life reasons why people might opt to incorporate more analog forms into their lives. He talks about the thrill of the hunt, how gratifying it can be to be in a charity shop, thrift store, whatever your terminology, and to find just that CD you've been looking for, or to find something completely off the wall, unexpected. He talks about how the medium is the message, how the actual physical form of the thing you are consuming enhances the experience of using it. And he talks about the potential for creation and curation of physical media through things like cassette mixtapes. And you know what? I agree. When I'm looking through my iTunes library, it's exhilarating. I have been sometimes in the morning getting ready for the day, just going in and clicking on an album I haven't listened to in probably years and just soaking it in. And yeah, there's an element of nostalgia to it. Of course, these are songs that I used to listen to all the time in kind of my teenage years to early 20s, and then apparently completely forgot about for the most part. And so yeah, it's nice to come back to them in that way, but I think there is something deeper, some aspect where I'm making a choice to engage with this media, where I am going through a list undirected by anyone else, by any force telling me what I should be listening to. And I'm saying, I want to listen to that one. And that just feels good. When I talk about bringing back this physical media, in some ways, joy doesn't even begin to cover it. I have been elated at points over the past several weeks, thinking about, what am I going to listen to next? This is so exciting. I feel like I finally have taken back the control over my music listening. Finally, I am choosing music according to my mood and not according to what are the last 6 things I listened to that Spotify is telling me are the last 6 things I listened to. So surely I'll just want to listen to one of those again, right? But still, as pure as the analog media trend might be in its intentions, you think it doesn't have detractors? Of course not. With all of this, with people talking about their new enthusiasm for the offline life, has of course sparked a little bit of backlash, perhaps, a little bit of skepticism, perhaps, as people say, oh, well, Is this trend to engage more with physical media not just an example of more consumerism? Are people not just going to buy more stuff they don't need and it's just going to end up in a landfill one day? Or people are saying, of course, people posting online about getting off social media or not engaging with algorithms or using physical media are hypocrites. Or they're saying that, oh, well, it's just going to be a passing fad. Like, no one can ever truly turn away from the convenience of streaming, the convenience of algorithmic suggestions. Don't we really want to keep that ultimately? Like, do we want to turn away and just use this physical media that's going to go into landfills? And I don't necessarily have a rebuttal for all of this. I don't know how this stuff is going to turn out. I don't know how it's going to turn out in my life. I don't know if I'm forever going to be like, I don't want to be on Spotify, but I can say for now it's pretty good. And I can also say that I don't know if consumers are so stupid that they're going to go out and buy a lot of physical media objects that they don't like or want just because they see it as a trend online. In fact, this seems like one of the most thoughtful trends I've seen in a while, but that's just my personal 2 cents. And as I understand it also, not only is it often a better experience, a more fulfilling experience to engage with physical media, it's also better for the creators of that media, for the artists, of course. Algorithmic platforms notoriously do not pay artists very well. And so isn't it better to go and actually buy the CD, the record, the MP3 file directly from the artist or from the record store or from, whatever, I know it's probably not all going to be a great deal for the artist because artists always do get screwed over, but isn't it better than the couple of cents they're going to make maybe per play of their song on Spotify? If I were to pick one element of the physical media conversation criticisms that feel valid to me, though, I would say it's the criticism that the physical media conversation often tends too much towards a sort of all or nothing mentality, kind of a black or white, you either do it or you don't kind of thinking, towards a self-optimization question that I think can run so rampant on the internet, towards this idea that, well, if you just do this thing differently in your media consumption life, you will fix all of your problems. You will not have any more problems with attention. You will be smarter. You will be better. You will be the best version of yourself if you just consume physical media. I see this attitude reflected a lot of the time in these lists that circulate sometimes about things I consumed this week instead of doom scrolling, or here are 10 articles that'll make you disgustingly well read. And every time I see one of these cross my social media feeds, it gives me this tense, weird feeling. And it's not because the content is bad. It's not because it's just called me out for doom scrolling, which of course I do, like everyone else. I'm not perfect. It's more that I feel that these sorts of lists assert a sort of pressure. It's almost like they're implying that, well, you and yourself are not enough. You need to be doing something else. You need to be better at consuming content, at finding media that is engaging and insightful and complex. But it's not even really telling you to engage with the media, to think about it. It's just saying read these 10 things and you'll be a better person, which I don't really believe. And maybe I'm being too hard on this content. Maybe it indeed is not that serious, but it does always just make me feel ugh, another thing to do. Even though ultimately I'll probably never read these things that are being recommended, no matter how interesting they sound, because it does just feel ugh, I cannot try to be better all the time. I need to do something else. And in all of this, I'm no stranger to the self-optimization impulse. I have throughout many phases of my life had many different self-optimization efforts. I've tried many strategies of self-improvement to make myself the perfect version of myself, and I keep doing it too. And maybe it's because I have so much experience of trying to improve myself that all of this rings a little false. All of this just feels like I don't think this is the actual answer. I think there's something different you could do that might lead to a better outcome that sure, it's valid to feel like, hey, maybe my attention span is not what I want it to be. Maybe my thoughts are not as deep as they used to feel. Maybe I need to read more focusedly, or maybe I need to take a step back and slow down and not be bombarded with constant stimuli. I think that's natural to feel, but is the way to do it to impose a curriculum on yourself? Or is there a better way? It's not even that I think it's wrong to try to curate the type of content you want to see, but I think the driving force behind the curation is a little bit misdirected. I don't think it's pointing towards what people want it to point towards. I don't think that pointing this physical media, longer form media, more thoughtful consumption of content conversation towards self-improvement is the way forward. I think there's a different way. In an article in The Atlantic, Charlie Rozelle writes about the rise of nihilism on the internet, the idea that everything is for attention and nothing matters. And the article cites the examples of the proliferation of AI slop and the lack of content moderation to explain why it can feel like the experience of life on these social media platforms is no longer as positive as it used to be, that it feels very This is not the magical internet we were promised, though maybe everything we're seeing today does have its roots in the age of internet optimism. Quoted in the Atlantic article and referencing the book It Came From Something Awful, author Dale Barron writes about how the 90s culture of nihilism extended into the internet of the 2000s and ultimately beyond. The quote from the book reads, "Like wine turned into vinegar, it could decay no further." Both culture and counterculture taught new generations to be so wary of being deceived and manipulated, it was best to hold nothing in your heart at all. And a lot of the time in these sorts of discussions, sites like 4chan are mentioned. Now, I've never been on 4chan, but I suppose I understand by this point that it became a place for really the mainstreaming of outrage, for the proliferation of alt-right ideas. But I would also say that perhaps the culture of outrage that took root maybe on platforms like 4chan, by this point has infiltrated all of the internet, even the spaces on the internet where, you're not really going to look to be outraged. You're maybe just going to look for lifestyle advice or entertainment or information or fun like you used to, back in the 2000s when the internet did seem optimistic and maybe even magical. But over time, everything turned into a relatively clear exercise in platforms making money, and by extent, the platforms turned into machines for stoking fear or anxiety or outrage, or perhaps, the desire for self-improvement. And no matter what it is, you just feel kind of defeated at the end of a day on the internet, whether you've been fed a lot of slop, whether you've had your outrage stoked, whether you've seen some debate that you wish you'd never seen, whether you now know everything about a topic that you really wish you didn't know about. All of it just feels a little bit hopeless. Also quoted in the Atlantic article and writing on young people's experience of the internet, Kyla Scanlon says that perhaps the nihilism comes from ultimately an attempt to find personal agency in a system that has increasingly denied it to them. This did get me thinking that, is it agency that is lacking? Agency being the ability to make intentional choices. At least that's how I would understand agency. Is it really agency that is lacking, or could it be something else? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, maybe it's not so much agency, but it's autonomy. And here, to get my definitions in order, I went to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to see exactly what autonomy is. And now there's a lot of philosophical writing on the concept of autonomy, but the basic concept can be defined as such. It is, to quote the Stanford Encyclopedia, put most simply, to be autonomous is to govern oneself, to be directed by considerations, desires, conditions, and characteristics that are not simply imposed externally upon one, but are part of what can somehow be considered one's authentic self. And there it is. Because is the experience of the internet, in fact, not something that can feel a little bit imposed externally on us? Is not the experience of the algorithmic internet not the feeling that we can't make choices within the algorithm, because we can, but the feeling that those choices are constrained, that the choices can only be made within this almost non-autonomous infrastructure of what information can be made available to us? What do the powers that be deem appropriate for us to see? What do they deem the most likely to make them money, to keep people engaged in conversation, not conversation, that's the wrong term, engaged in argument, in debate? What do they think will keep people on the platforms for longest, but also will not stoke any kind of let's say more revolutionary political tendencies? What will keep people watching, but not really acting? And it turns out this is exactly by design. In a paper on technology, autonomy, and manipulation, Susser, Rosler, and Nissenbaum argue that autonomy is generally situated within a social world. In our view, autonomous persons are socially, culturally, historically, and politically situated, which is to say we acknowledge the intersubjective and social dimensions of selfhood and identity for individual autonomy and moral and political agency. Though social contexts can constrain our choices by conditioning us to behave in stereotypical ways, as, for example, in the case of gendered social expectations, it is also our social contexts that bestow value on autonomy, teaching us what it means to make independent decisions, providing us with rich sets of options from which to choose. Whereas in online spaces, social contracts do not exist, it seems, in the same way, where decision-making operates through these shadowy mechanisms. What we're allowed to see and not see is not really determined by any force that we necessarily like or trust. It's simply presented to us, and then we choose within this preset decision framework. It's not the social contexts of our positive, productive, collaborative relationships with other people setting the tone for our interactions online. It is the profit motives of the tech companies. Or, as the authors of the paper put it, it is manipulation. It is hidden influence based on the profit-making desires of social media platforms, based on the information that they gather about us without our consent. And now, as I'm thinking about this autonomy conversation, and I'm thinking about how the platforms function, I'm thinking indeed about how this conversation about physical media, non-algorithmic media, has been almost fed to me through an algorithm, but then has gotten me thinking more deeply about algorithms. It does make me wonder, well, is the algorithm such a bad thing after all? Has it not served its purpose in delivering me up content that I find interesting and then that I integrate into my life and that maybe will change my behavior over time? And the thing is, I don't know how it's going to play out. And I think it is very easy to be skeptical of the algorithmic landscape and to understand that it is manipulating us. But there is this idea that maybe if we manipulate it right back, or rather, if we exercise intention in shaping what algorithms show us, that maybe algorithms don't have to be so bad. Maybe algorithmic media doesn't have to be such a negative force in our lives. Maybe it doesn't have to be completely boring and the death of novelty and something that only shows us the same predictable ideas over and over. Maybe it can actually be a force for new ideas and maybe more novelty if we just shape it right. And this is where I came across the concept of be your own algorithm. And it's an interesting one. This idea that as you are engaging with algorithmic media, that you can also exert some control, perhaps some autonomy, even perhaps, no, not autonomy, really, agency. You can exercise an even more intentional agency within a non-autonomous landscape to decide very intentionally what you want to show your algorithm you are interested in, and in turn to influence what it shows you, to ensure that what it's showing you is something that is of value. And so maybe then it's like, well, all of this algorithmic media showing me how to get off algorithmic media is actually like a great force in my life. Maybe I just was my own algorithm there. Maybe I did exercise this intentional choice, showing the algorithm that I want more thoughtful, interesting content, and that's leading me to change my behaviors in a positive way. And I think in some ways, yeah, I mean, it's great, and I kind of come back though to like these ideas of like what you should be consuming instead of doom scrolling. And I feel like, this is the very thing that when I talk about like the misdirection of our relationships to the algorithm, and what I think is happening in this physical media conversation, this non-algorithmic media conversation, what's actually happening when I talk about the fact that our driving force is wrong is that, of course, like we're framing it as something we need to do, we must do, something that is required of us to fix ourselves. And I think like if I'm to give a theory of how like algorithmic social media platforms influence our minds, I would say that it functions to make us believe that we are flawed, inferior, needing of improvement, and it keeps us locked into these cycles of individualized self-improvement, self-optimization. And so I think if you're saying, well, I want to like read more books, or I want to read longer form articles, or I want to use only physical media and nothing else, like it's missing the point, because like you're approaching that from a perspective of like needing to fix yourself, needing to fix your broken attention span, where what I think you actually need to be pursuing is enjoyment, joy, genuine interest, because that will keep you engaged. And I think that no matter what form of media people engage with, like that should be the intention behind it. That is where the be your own algorithm conversation is compelling, because I think that that one is oriented towards a sort of joy in the content that you are consuming. It's taking people out of the boxes of what the algorithm wants them to be, how the algorithm wants them to think of themselves as flawed and as needing improvement, and turns them instead towards a place of almost like generative interest, of excitement for the world and for the ideas that you can discover. And in that way, I think algorithmic media can be great. I think it can be a great discovery tool. I think also physical media can be great. It can be a great place to find novelty. It can be a great place to engage deeply with an idea, but you shouldn't be engaging deeply with an idea because you want to fix your attention span. You should be engaging deeply with an idea because it is interesting to you, because it brings you joy, because it makes you ask questions about the world. That's the value of this deeper engagement. That's the value of long form media. And ultimately, it should also be about taking that media, indeed, taking that interest, taking that genuine passion and drive to learn more about the world, and then actually taking it out into the world. Because you know what else the algorithm doesn't like is when you leave it behind. The algorithm doesn't want you to be like, okay, I have learned all I can. I'm going to step away from this content now, and I'm going to go and like apply the ideas that I have gained through being online. I think if I'm to offer one final thought on this conversation about algorithms and physical media and the analog conversation, I will say that I think one of the best things about physical media is that it offers an off-ramp, an easy off-ramp. Like when you're finished reading a book, you close the book, you put it back on the shelf, you maybe think about what you read, and you go forth into life. When you've finished listening to an album, whether it's on CD or on record or even a cassette, like I don't see that one mentioned very much, though it is in one of the videos I referenced. But then you finished it and you can decide, do I want to play something else, or am I done? Do I want to do something different for a while? Do I want to go live in the world? So I think if I am to offer one final concluding idea, it's chase the joy in the media you consume, whether that is physical media or algorithmic media. And when you're done with it, go out, live life, be in the world, take the ideas that you have consumed and turn them into something new.